When you hear fans talk about who some of the best players in the league are, Paul George is always in the discussion, but the more you hear fans talk about him, the more you see just how polarizing of a player he is. Some swear he's a top 5, top 10 player in the league. Others have him top 15, top 20, and I've even seen people rank him as far down as top 35. However, I think we should give him credit where he deserves it. He's a great two-way player who impacts both sides of the court, and when he's hot, he's an absolute flamethrower. But when he's cold, it seems like an eternity before he breaks out of his slump. This has led to PG putting up some very solid box score numbers, but for some reason, once the postseason hits, it's like PG is a whole different person. In fact, he's given himself a nickname for when the playoffs come around. Everyone's heard it, everyone's memed it. It's the infamous Playoff P. And most recently, with how Paul George has performed in the playoffs so far, the name has been far from the truth. I mean, he's been so bad that fans have had a petition set up to get this man to play overseas. But we'll look into that later in the video. And before we dive into how quote-unquote Playoff P performs, or should I say disappears in the playoffs, let's look at the origin of the nickname and where it all began. Let's look back at the 2018 playoffs. Paul George is in his first season with the Oklahoma City Thunder, forming what we thought was a big three with Westbrook and Carmelo Anthony. You know, as a Carmelo fan, I like to forget this season ever existed, but I digress. PG had a pretty decent year with the Thunder, and even through some growing pains and adjustments to the new team and playstyle, he still managed to put up about 22 points, 6 rebounds, and 3 assists to go along with 2 steals. He also shot 43% from the field and 40% from 3. The Thunder went 48-34 and set themselves up for a matchup with rising star Donovan Mitchell and the Utah Jazz. And when asked about guarding Donovan Mitchell, Paul George now infamously said,
"Use this. Y'all ain't met Playoff P yet, huh?"
And we know how the series went from there. The Thunder got eliminated in 6 games to many people's shock, no pun intended, but how did Paul George do specifically? Taking a look at the numbers, PG wasn't bad by any means, averaging 25 points, 6 rebounds, and 3 assists. He had a magnificent game 1, putting up 36 points on extremely efficient shooting. However, looking at the percentages throughout the series, he shot just 41% from the field and 36.5% from 3, a dip from his regular season numbers. But 2 games stand out to me in this series, Game 2 and Game 6. Game 2 was a pretty important game in the series for the Thunder, as they were looking to go up 2-0 against a young Jazz team. OKC went into the 4th quarter up 7 points. They looked in control of the game, and yet, the team absolutely collapsed, blowing their lead and lost to the Jazz by 7 points instead. The Jazz built upon this momentum for the next 2 games and won games 3 and 4 to give themselves a commanding 3-1 lead. In the 4th quarter of Game 2, Carmelo went 0 for 4, and Westbrook went 0 for 4 as well, but in Westbrook's defense, he distributed the ball very well with 4 assists in the quarter. So looking at PG, you'd think he'd be the one to step up as he was the second option on the team, right? No. He went 0 for 6 from the field, 0 for 2 from 3, and had just 2 rebounds and 1 block in the 4th quarter, with a plus-minus of -12. And I'm not solely putting the blame on PG by any means, because aside from Steven Adams, the team played horribly in that quarter. But you'd think that someone of his talent and caliber would at least step up when the others are down, right? But let's go on to Game 6. Oh man, the infamous Game 6. We know how the Thunder lost this game, but some people had the audacity to say that Westbrook shot his team out of the game by going 18 of 43, but he was really the only one keeping them alive, accounting for more than half the team's points, along with Steven Adams. So I don't want to hear this argument anymore, because the fact of the matter is that Paul George flat out threw the game for the Thunder, and he shot his team out of the game, going 2 of 16 from the field, and 0 of 6 from 3 for a whopping 5 points. 5 points in 45 minutes. 45 minutes. And sure, he had 8 assists, but he also had a whopping 6 turnovers and 3 fouls. Imagine being a quote-unquote all-star or even superstar and having more turnovers than points, and nearly as many fouls as points. Nah man, he gets clowned for it every day, and he 100% deserves it. Man got outplayed by Joe Ingles, who by no means is a scrub, but still, Joe Ingles outplayed Paul George. End of discussion. So looking to recover from an embarrassing loss the previous season, Paul George re-signed with the Thunder and looked to be on a mission, and this was his famous MVPG campaign. Russell Westbrook took a back seat to him, and the results were magnificent. George put up a career-high 28 points per game to go along with 8 rebounds, 4 assists, and 2.2 steals per game. And look, I'm gonna be honest, Paul George had a pretty good series against the Blazers, putting up around the same numbers as he did in the regular season. He even showed up in the elimination game with 36 points on 70% shooting. He did great, except for when he got gamed by Damian Lillard. And look, I have no problem that the shot got hit over PG, but his reaction after that? Nah, just take your L and be on your way. Saying it was a bad shot when Lillard is one of the best deep shooters in the league, one of the best known deep shooters in the league. Nah man, just play up on him maybe, don't let him get his rhythm dribbles in, and maybe he would have missed that shot. But let's move to this season, the 2020 season. PG is on a new team with a new superstar in Kawhi Leonard, and he gets a fresh start after the failure that was OKC. He put up a pretty solid regular season while fighting through numerous injuries, and the Clippers secured the 2nd seed in the Western Conference, and were considered by many to take the West and perhaps the NBA Finals. And they just beat Dallas in a tough first round matchup. All is great, right? Well, not so much for Paul George. Yes, PG had a great Game 5, putting up 35 points on 67% shooting, and a pretty good Game 1 as well. But man, if you remove Game 5 and look at the rest of the series, to say it's ugly is an understatement. I mean, games 2 through 4 were absolutely horrendous, and game 6, while not absolutely horrendous, was still way below his standards. In game 2, he was scoreless in the first half, picking up 3 fouls, and in the second half shot just 4 of 15. In game 3, he was absolutely atrocious in both halves, and in game 4, including the overtime period, he put up just 2 points in the second half, and looked absolutely scared to shoot the ball. And in the closeout game, PG started out promising with 14 points in the first half, but absolutely disappeared with just 1 point in the second half. I know I'm being hard on him, but he has to step up. He's not getting paid $30 million a year just to play good defense. Nobody's gonna pay Tony Allen that much to play good defense. He has to be more than this. What concerns me is that Dallas is one of the weaker teams in the league in terms of defense, and as the playoffs go on, he'll definitely be facing tougher opponents. We may even see him in a rematch against the Utah Jazz again. Think about it. Kawhi left Toronto, a championship team, just to go play with Paul George in LA. Kawhi demanded the Clippers get Paul George before he signed to play in LA. Imagine Kawhi with the current Toronto team now. With the way PG is playing, it seems like Kawhi should have stayed there and the Clippers may have given up too much for PG. But you know how this could all be solved and people could mostly forget about this? It's simple. Win the title. And for the Clippers to win the title, they'll need MVP G to be playing his best and not playoff P. Thank you very much for watching the video, and put in the comments below how you think Paul George could play better, okay? We need to get him some help. And also, don't forget to like the video and subscribe with post notifications on. We're trying to upload every Monday and Thursday, and it's been turning out pretty okay, so be on the lookout for that. But with all that being said, remember this. Paul George shot below 25% in games 2 through 4, the first time since Bob Cousy did that. Paul George is shooting as bad as a guy from the 60s. Let that sink in.